This is Radio Ecoshock with Alex Smith.
Ocean currents that keep the East Coast and Northern Europe warm are weakening. Proof keeps piling up. Is there a tipping point, and how long until we get there? From Maynooth Ireland, Dr. Levke Caesar returns with the latest results.
In 2018, Levke published her first paper in the journal Nature. She appeared on Radio Ecoshock to explain it. Levke Caesar is part of the Irish Climate Analysis and Research Unit at Maynooth University. She's also a guest scientist at PIC, the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. The latest word doesn't sound too good. Published in February 2021 in Nature, the paper is called Current Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation Weakest in the Last Millennium. Levke, welcome back to Radio Ecoshock.
Yeah, thank you for having me again.
You just returned from a shipboard expedition. What are you up to?
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, I just spent the last 2 weeks basically in the Northeast Atlantic, and we took ocean measurements there, which basically allow us to track different water masses. And the long-term goal is to find a connection between the large-scale circulations in the Atlantic, like the Amok, the Gulf Stream system, and the currents closer to the coast of Ireland and other countries, because they are really important for example, the coastal conditions, and therefore for fishing industry and sea level rise at the coast. And we try to make that connection by, first of all, collecting data.
You were trained in German universities, but now work out of Ireland as well. What is at stake for Ireland if this great Atlantic circulation system continues to weaken or even eventually stop?
Oh, well, Ireland is, I guess, for European countries, one of the countries that is just most affected by the Gulf Stream system. I mean, I live in Maynooth, which is close to Dublin, but if you go to the southwest part of Ireland, to Cork, for example, you have like palm trees growing there, which is something I'm not used to from Germany. And if the system changes by a lot, this will definitely have impact on Ireland climate conditions. And what they are exactly is definitely ongoing investigation, but it might result in a less mild climate than the one we are experiencing right now.
Palm trees in Ireland. I had no idea. So we should introduce any latecomers to one key term, and that's Amok. We're going to say it again and again. What does it stand for, and what is it?
Well, Amok is short for Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation. So Atlantic is pretty clear because it's a system of ocean currents in the Atlantic. And meridional is basically the fancy term for south-northward. So this is like the meridional direction. And that name comes because the overturning circulation is flowing from the south of the Atlantic towards the north. And we call it an overturning circulation because on the way towards the North Atlantic, it consists of warm and saline surface waters. And on the way back, it's actually flowing in deeper ocean layers and consists of colder and less saline water. So we really have like an overturning of water masses.
Well, people in North America think of the Gulf Stream, but others in the UK talk about the North Atlantic Drift. Talk to us about this great engine as a kind of system rather than a single current with many moving parts.
Exactly. So it would be wrong to say that the Amok is just the Gulf Stream, but the Gulf Stream is part of the overturning circulation. As I said, the overturning circulation consists of many, many different currents. It's also wrong to actually say that these currents are exclusively part of the Amok, but that's a question about a definition. So the Gulf Stream itself, for example, is largely actually wind-driven, and it can carry way more water masses than those that actually contribute to the overturning of the Amok. But I guess for the a common person, it would be important to know that when I talk about the Amok, or when scientists talk about the Amok, they don't just refer to the Gulf Stream, but actually what we call the Gulf Stream system consisting of, as I said, many, many currents.
And your study attempts to reconstruct the North Atlantic current system all the way back to the year 400 of our Common Era. We have difficulty measuring what is happening now. How could anyone possibly know what ocean currents were doing hundreds of years ago?
That's a really good question. And you're right. So these measurements of the overturning circulation started only in 2004. So for everything before that date, we actually have to look at what scientists call proxy data, in the sense that they give you not a direct but an indirect way of measuring the ocean current. And to find the right proxy data for the overturning circulation, you have to know what does the overturning circulation do, what parts of the climate system are affected by it. So what we, for example, look at is actually the sea surface temperatures in the subpolar North Atlantic, because the overturning circulation is carrying a lot of heat towards that region. And as the overturning circulation slows down, there's less heat being transported into that region, and we see a cooling. Now, we didn't just look at this one proxy data because, as you can imagine, the sea surface temperatures in the subpolar North Atlantic are also affected by the atmosphere. And that's basically the problem of any kind of proxy data. It is also affected by other parts of the climate system besides the one that you really want to pinpoint it to, in our case, the overturning circulation. So something else we looked at, for example, is actually the grain size in ocean sediments. Because if you choose the location right, then these grain size can give you an idea of the speed, of the velocity of the ocean current, of the deep ocean current at that place, basically just because of the reason that a faster ocean current can actually carry larger grain sizes with it than a slower one. And this is what we did. We looked at all these different proxy data, also, for example, looking at the abundances of different coral species, and they are all related to the Amok, to the overturning circulation in a different way. And we thought if they nevertheless all show the same message, the same evolution of the overturning circulation, that means that we really increase our the trustworthiness of these results, basically, our confidence that they are right.
In the new paper, you present a brief history of the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation. When was it last deemed stable, and when did the Great Weakening pick up speed?
Yes, so as you already mentioned, our data go back as far as 400 AD, and we see that since that time, at least, the Amok appears to be really stable. So it does have a little bit of decadal variability, but that's normal for a part of the climate system. And only in the midst of the 19th century, it starts to really show a decline in all of the different proxy data. And instead of basically going back to increasing in strength, there's actually a second decline that we see starting in the midst of the 20th century, which is even more rapid than the first one. And this both then leads to the overturning circulation over the last decades being at a lower state in strength than ever before in these 1,600 years.
Can we chart out the rate of weakening all the way to the year 2100, and with what confidence?
Well, it's difficult to say that there's like a certain specific rate of weakening, in the sense that despite this long-term weakening, there still and always will be some kind of natural variability of the overturning circulation that is basically overlaid, superimposed on this long-term trend. So it would be possible, for example, that the overturning circulation actually will gain some strength over the next few years, but it will very, very likely then weaken again, because this is what we see in all the different climate models that we're looking at. And it seems to be that, and this of course depends a lot on our behavior, on how much carbon dioxide is emitted to the atmosphere, but we should expect at least another 30% of weakening until the end of the century, maybe even up to as high as 50%.
I was rummaging around looking at another paper led by Francisco Muschiciello, and it's published in Nature Communications in March 2019. They determined that abrupt climate changes appeared in Greenland ice cores about 400 years after changes in the North Atlantic deep water formation. Could there be a 100 or 400 year delay before impacts of deep water changes are seen? What do you know about the ocean as kind of a forerunner of changes on land?
Oh, there definitely could be some very long-term in the sense of centennial implication that we do not see right now. This is basically because the ocean does react slower than the atmosphere to changes just because of its size and its being capacity of storing heat, of storing carbon. And if the overturning circulation is starting to slow down right now, it might take a long time before it completely shuts down. And because of its role as a carrier of heat, for example, from the southern hemisphere to the northern hemisphere, we do see, and there are even more studies on that at the moment, that changes in the overturning circulation can have long-term implications for both hemispheres, just because they're just changing how much heat is transported towards a region or not. So I guess I wouldn't pinpoint the timescale to being exactly 400 years, but there are definitely long-term implications of a slowdown of the overturning. And one of them is, of course, whether or not the overturning circulation will tip, in the sense that, we call it a tipping of the overturning circulation when the further slowdown can't be stopped anymore, even though we actually might be able to deal with climate change in the sense that we stop global warming. So right now we're at the point, very likely, that if we stop global warming right now, then the overturning circulation will recover. But once it tipped, afterwards we could stop global warming and it would not recover, but it would actually continue to slow down even further.
Well, you've made several important points there. I mean, whether it's reversible or not is something I was going to ask you about, but also that this is not just a story for New England or Ireland or the UK and Northern Europe. This is something that could affect the whole of the global climate system.
Oh, definitely. Because right now, I don't know whether whether this is general knowledge, but basically the northern hemisphere is warmer at the moment than the southern hemisphere on average. Of course, it depends. There are seasonal differences, but on average, there's more heat on the northern hemisphere than the southern hemisphere. And this is part because of the overturning circulation. And of course, the whole marine ecosystem in the Atlantic is used to the overturning circulation flowing as it does, to its distribution of nutrients, of carbon. And there are so many other things. We know that the overturning circulation plays a large role in actually the storage of carbon in the ocean. So right now, the ocean is actually taking up a lot of the carbon that we're emitting to the atmosphere at the moment, and therefore it's like a buffer, and it leads to the global temperature not decreasing as fast as it otherwise would be or could. And the overturning circulation plays a large role here. So there are, and this I think in my opinion is one of the really great dangers, there are probably a lot of implications of slowdown of the overturning circulation that we do not know at the moment, or that we do not know about in detail at the moment, and which makes it a high risk to play with, in my opinion.
How much of the Amok weakening can be attributed to fresh water pouring off Greenland, including the strange cold blob of water south of Greenland?
Oh, that's a good question, and we can't pinpoint here exact numbers. So it seems that at the moment, actually, the melting of the Greenland ice sheet, even though it is increasing, is not the major driver in the slowdown of the overturning circulation. But that is actually at the moment rather that we have a warming of the deep water formation sites. And with deep water formation sites, I mean the place where the overturning takes place, where the water masses are sinking to deeper ocean layers. And because warm water is less dense than cold water, actually also the warming of that areas would affect the overturning circulation. But what we see from model simulation is that the Greenland ice sheet melting will very likely play a more important part in the future, and that at least in climate model simulations, the melting is capable of stopping the overturning circulation.
This is Radio Ecoshock. I'm Alex Smith. Our guest from Maynooth, Ireland is Dr. Levke Caesar, talking about the slowdown in North Atlantic currents that heat Europe and North America. When you get right down to it, Levke, we all want to know, how does a warming planet manage to change an ocean system so vast? How do increasing greenhouse gases change the motion of the ocean?
Oh, that's basically the link you already mentioned. So basically, increased greenhouse gas concentration means a warmer world. I guess that far is known to most people by now. And when we have a warmer world, well, we don't just have a warmer world. We also see changes in a lot of other climate factors, for example, in the precipitation patterns. And for the North Atlantic, it's the case that in a warmer world, we have actually more precipitation over the North Atlantic. This is one factor that adds fresh water to the North Atlantic. And then, as you said, we have the melting of the Greenland ice sheet. We also have the melting of the Arctic sea ice. And of course, sea ice is not completely fresh water, but sea ice is actually fresher than the ocean water below it because of the freezing process, basically. So there are different factors in a warming world that lead to fresh water being added to the subpolar North Atlantic. And as fresh water, having a smaller salt content, is also less dense than the saltier ocean water. This, again, is hindering this formation of deep water, which is one of the main drivers of the overturning circulation. But I know sometimes it feels like, whoa, such a small thing basically can have such a large impact. But that's basically the story of Earth's climate, that sometimes small local factors can actually have a large impact.
Well, suppose we don't reach a tipping point anytime soon, but the system continues to gradually weaken over time, as we're already seeing, and you've documented in this paper. What are the impacts of that?
Well, we don't know all of them yet, I suppose. But what is very well understood is basically that a slowdown of the overturning circulation can actually increase sea level rise at the U.S. East Coast, basically for cities like New York or Boston, which is basically linked to some basic physics of the Earth. So due to the Earth's rotation, when you're on the northern hemisphere and you're moving northward, you would be deflected to the right. So a human doesn't feel that force, but you can actually see it, for example, on train tracks, that the right side is more used, basically, because there's a force trying to deflect every moving parcel. And this also happens to the overturning circulation. So basically, because of the flow of the overturning circulation, water masses in front of the U.S. East Coast are deflected to the right. And when the overturning circulation slows down, this force is weakening and more water can pile up at the actual coastline, basically increasing sea level rise there. This is like one pretty well understood mechanism, but we also see from climate model simulations that a slower Amok is linked to increased storm tracks over the North Atlantic. So it could, in principle, increase winter storms for example, the UK or other parts of northwestern Europe. And this might seem like very paradox, but especially for the 2015 heat wave in Europe, there has been shown that this is actually, or has been linked to the cold temperatures, the cold sea surface temperatures in the subpolar North Atlantic at that same year. They sound weird, having cold water temperatures and a heat wave, but what those cold water temperatures did is that they favored a position of the jet stream, that is the strong atmospheric circulation, that allowed warm air to be channeled into Europe from the south. And so there are like many indicators of what could happen, and we just have to investigate further into that.
Well, some of us have seen the movie The Day After Tomorrow, and that was the doomsday fear where the whole overturning system might reach a tipping point and it shuts down. Is that possible?
Well, it's possible that it shuts down, definitely. It's not possible in the way the movie showed it. So what we have to understand that abrupt climate change happens on timescales that in the human mind not appear that abrupt. So the overturning circulation is not going to shut down within a couple of days, or not even within a couple of years, even when the tipping point is reached. So what's the importance of the tipping point being reached is that it's afterwards unstoppable, but it will still take a long time for it to actually happen. And then I guess in principle, some of the things shown in the movie are correct, but they are all like crushed into really, really small time scales, I guess, to make it more interesting, because making a Hollywood blockbuster basically taking over the time scale of decades might be more difficult because, I don't know, aging actors and so on. So, no, the message is it can stop, but it's not going to look like as in the day after tomorrow.
There was a slight slowdown in the weakening in the 1990s, and I'm wondering, can we create another pause or a reduction in the rate of weakening by slashing greenhouse gas emissions, or would the process continue anyway once it started?
Well, as I said, when the Amok really tipped, it will be basically very, very difficult to halt it, and unlikely that we can do it. Right now, at the moment, we can definitely still interfere in this process, but it won't be a linear response. So just because we have like 1 year of less global warming doesn't mean that this 1 year shows a weaker Amok slowdown. But that is because there's so many processes and elements that are affecting the overturning circulation that we can only see our changes in behavior on the longer timescales. But no, it's definitely, actually, it's really important that we know that when we reduce global warming, we will also reduce weakening of the overturning circulation.
Well, obviously, we need to know a lot more. Are measurements of the North Atlantic currents, the temperatures, the salinity, the motion, are they being taken in real time now?
Yeah, I mean, not everywhere, but there are different basically networks of measurement devices and at different places of the North Atlantic. So there's also now one in the South Atlantic, looking what's happening there and whether this relates to what's happening in the North Atlantic. And then not just in the North Atlantic at 26 degrees north, but also higher up, where we can monitor the actual process of the overturning of the deep water formation better. And I guess here it's always, of course, a problem of basically funding, of getting enough money to support these measurement networks in the future, because they're pretty expensive. But right now there is data, and I hope there will be more data in the future, because for some of these places we only have data for like 1 or 2 years, and that's not enough to understand the whole process.
Is there any central agency or institution that's charged with monitoring the health of the North Atlantic currents, as important as they are to civilization as we know it?
Well, there's not like a single institution, but there are actually different international projects where different institutes, mainly, of course, from countries like US, Canada, and then those one in Europe, which are close to the North Atlantic, and they do an effort of, basically keeping these monitoring systems. But there's like not one Amok watch organization.
Perhaps we should have one. Meanwhile, where in the IPCC reporting process are the ocean changes in your report? Will this possible regional cooling be included in the AR6 synthesis report coming out in January 2022?
So I've basically been in contact with a few of the authors for the corresponding chapter of the report, and so I'm pretty confident that it will be in there.
I guess my concern is fundamental changes could happen in ocean circulation without immediate consequences, perhaps, and then appear in a dangerous, rude surprise. Or is the whole process too slow and it's buffered by the sheer size of the ocean? Do we know for sure what to expect?
Well, we don't know for sure what to expect, but I mean, humans, we do live, or hopefully live, 70, 80, maybe even 90 years. So I guess it's true for the whole climate change process. We start, even as humans, we start to see changes in the sense that we compare, winter, summer times, and this, of course, is mainly weather, but if we compare it as we experienced it in the last years to how we experienced it 20, 25 years ago, then I guess even humans can definitely grasp some changes. Might be more true, actually, for people who work a lot of outside and have the direct connection. But the problem is there's no early warning system that tells us from climate, from nature, if you keep doing this, this will happen. But we actually might know about something only at the point where we can't stop it anymore and we can't really do anything anymore. And that's one of the great dangers of climate change.
It sounds a little bit like science fiction almost to think that we could have a little ice age practically in the UK and Northern Europe if this whole overturning circulation shifts. And that could happen while the rest of the world is warming a great deal. And because the rest of the world is warming a great deal. Don't you find that strange?
Well, I guess maybe not that much anymore. I guess if you, like me, are confronted with the strangeness of the climate system basically every day, you just kind of start to get used to it, and it doesn't feel strange anymore. But I suppose in the sense it does feel weird and maybe unfair. But it's also important to know here, due to, well, basically going on global warming, even if we have a little cooling here, it will, over the course of years, be overlaid and at some point basically overruled by this general warming trend. So it's not going to be like really cold suddenly here, just because, as I said, the slowdown of the overturning circulation, it's showing its effect takes some time. And at the same time, we just have increased global temperatures anyway. So, yeah.
And are you going to keep your focus on this subject, or are you already branching out into other research? What are you up to now?
Oh, no, I definitely keep this focus. And I just want to understand more because we do see, as I kind of mentioned, we see this natural variability of the Amok. But that, too, is not completely understood because while we're used to climate or elements of the climate system showing natural variability, there has to be a cause behind it, and we would like to understand that. And then, of course, it's also interesting to maybe actually have or find some way of an early warning system of a further slowdown. And so I'm looking a little bit into that. And then I'm really interested in digging more into the consequences for right now, mainly Europe, mainly Ireland, of the continued slowdown. So that's definitely still my focus area of research.
We have been speaking with scientist Levke Caesar. She is working with the Irish Climate Analysis and Research Unit at Maynooth University and with the Potsdam Institute as a guest scientist. Her latest paper published in Nature is titled Current Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation Weakest in the Last Millennium. You can find links to learn more in my weekly show blog at ecoshock.org. Levke, thank you for coming back to report new science on Radio Ecoshock.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
I'm Alex Smith.